It was the fall of 1996, and I was about to make a choice that would dominate the way I played video games over the next few years. My trusty old IBM Aptiva 486, which I could usually count on to play my favorite games, was starting to show its age. Sequels to my favorite games like Descent and The Elder Scrolls were unplayable. And although I could get the successor to id Software's Doom series Quake to run, the abysmal frame rates I'd get with its real-time 3D rendering made it clear I was going to need new hardware moving forward in order to enjoy the industry's latest offerings. As a 14-year-old with little cash to my name, a new computer was certainly out of the question. Fortunately, I could look to the 5th generation of home consoles to get my fix. The leap from 4th to 5th generation was huge, with the latter offering 3D polygon graphics, CD quality audio, and full motion video. By this time, the full lineup of 5th generation consoles had all been released, those being of course the 3DO, Atari Jaguar, Sega Saturn, Sony Playstation, and the Nintendo 64. It was crystal clear by the end of 1996 that the 3DO and Atari Jaguar were failures and weren't to be considered. The Nintendo 64 was newly released, but the extremely limited number of titles available at launch left much to be desired. Although the Sega CD and 32X failed to garner much mass market appeal, as a fan of the Genesis, there was little doubt in my mind that Sega would get it figured out and that the Saturn would be the console to go for. Yes, I know that by this time the PlayStation 1 was outselling the Saturn in North America, and that is kind of the point of this video. Sony was unproven to me at this point, and they would need to convince me to buy their product over Sega's. After all, it was 1996, and I didn't exactly have up-to-date, accurate access to sales figures, nor did I care. I could only gauge the success of the console by the size of its rental section in Blockbuster Video. Speaking of Blockbuster Video, at the time you could rent home consoles for a weekend. So of course I'd rent the Saturn first. And although I had fun with games like Road Rash, why not give the PlayStation a chance? After all, just look at how cool the Resident Evil art looks on this lawn box. So of course I would end up renting the console, and these are 5 early PS1 games that steered me away from the Sega towards Sony, and I never looked back. Well, except for the odd game of Virtua Cop at my buddy's place. First up is the Twisted Metal series. Twisted Metal 1 absolutely blew my mind. The art style, the violence, fast, frantic, addictive gameplay, multiplayer duels, all these combined to create a quality gaming experience that instantly secured my faith in the future of the console. That Cyberbia level looks so great for the time, I don't care what anyone says. The series reminded me of a game I played on DOS about a year prior called Quarantine the Road Warrior. I remembered how violent and gritty that game was, but all in good fun with a dark humor twist. Twisted Metal would prove the PlayStation could offer cool, innovative, mature, violent games on par with what was being seen at DOS at the time. More importantly, you'd be left with a sense of wonder over the level of balance and quality to the whole experience. About a year later, the sequel Twisted Metal 2 would arrive. The developer single track would improve upon every single aspect of the first game, especially on the driving and combat physics, and the addition of a 2-player co-op mode. You can bet this game was on my Christmas list that year. Next up is another game from Single Track, Jet Moto. Jet Moto was a racing game like no other, featuring futuristic hoverbikes that could traverse both water and land. The game's courses were challenging and varied, featuring jumps, obstacles, and multiple routes. Players had to master the game's physics and learn to use the environment to their advantage to win races. This was probably the first 3D racer I played where it felt like physics truly mattered. The game's controls were tight and responsive, with a unique mechanic that allowed players to grapple onto certain surfaces to gain momentum or navigate through tight turns. It took some practice to master, but once you got the hang of it, it was incredibly satisfying to zip through a course at breakneck speeds. It looked amazing too. I'd always loved the water and tree effects on that swamp level. Last but not least, it had a great soundtrack. Again, Single Track knew how to make things cool. Third on my list is another racing game, but this time from developer Psygnosis. The game, of course, is Destruction Derby 2. This game was a must-buy in November 1996. The game's destruction-focused gameplay was a breath of fresh air for the racing genre, and the ability to wreck your opponents added a new layer of strategy to each race. With a variety of game modes to choose from, including the fan-favorite Destruction Derby mode, players could spend hours wrecking their way to victory. But my favorite was the career stock car mode. It was so satisfying learning how to master the pro car. You could easily lose control, but it was fast and you would need to master the drift mechanic in order to win races. As you can see from this gameplay footage, I've obviously forgotten how to do it. Another highlight of Destruction Derby 2 was the crashes. The game's physics engine allowed for some truly spectacular wrecks, and each collision felt satisfying and impactful. Another favorite of mine released around this time was Silicon Knights' Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain. It would quickly become a cult classic among action-adventure game fans and spawned several sequels down the line. What sets Blood Omen Legacy of Kain apart from other games of its era is its emphasis on storytelling. The game features a complex and engaging narrative, full of twists and turns, that is brought to life through well-written dialogue and strong voice acting. The game's dark and moody atmosphere, combined with its mature themes and complex characters, creates a sense of immersion that is rarely seen in video games. In terms of gameplay, Blood Omen Legacy of Kain is a mix of action, exploration, and puzzle solving. The game is played from a top-down perspective, with Kain navigating various environments, battling enemies, and acquiring new abilities as he progresses. The combat is simple but satisfying, with a variety of weapons and spells at Kain's disposal. The puzzles are well designed and often requires a bit of thought to solve, adding an extra layer of depth to the game. And the last game I want to talk about is Resident Evil. Well, what can I say about this game that hasn't already been said? It's been over 25 years since the release of the original, and it's hard to overstate the impact it's had on the survival horror genre. My own personal take, as I said, I remember seeing the long box on display in Blockbuster long before I'd play it for the first time. I can only imagine what the gameplay experience was like from what I saw on the screenshots on the back cover, and from my friend's verbal description of his first-hand experience with the game. I'd never actually played Alone in the Dark for PC, so I didn't really know what survival horror was. I seem to recall renting D before playing this, and maybe I was expecting a similar experience. From its haunting soundtrack to its gruesome monsters, Resident Evil set the standard for what a horror game could be. And while the game's story and dialogue may be cheesy by today's standards, they were a big part of what made Resident Evil so memorable. But what really made Resident Evil stand out was its unique blend of puzzle solving and survival horror gameplay. The limited resources and deadly enemies made every encounter tense and thrilling. I remember playing this game over a weekend with no memory card. It was like a primitive Iron Man mode, and getting my head torn off instantly by a hunter and losing 5+ hours of gameplay and having to restart is a memory that will stick with me forever. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've made it this far, please consider subscribing. Hope to see you next time. Take care.